Okay, to review. We remember that after the Three Kingdoms, the Western Jin Dynasty took over, and they unified China, and it's what year? You'll recall the Wei Dynasty, Cao Cao's son, Cao Pei, took over in 220, 265. By that time, he had conquered Liu Bei's dynasty down in the southwest, and then the general that conquered him, by the name of Sima, overthrew the Cao dynasty and declared his own Jin dynasty in 265. Within 15 years, he had gone ahead and conquered, unified, that's this part, unified China in 279. So the Jin dynasty unifies things, but yet there it is, within what, 30 years it's collapsed. So in a total of 40 years, the Jin dynasty went from feudal to warring states to collapsed, and that power vacuum was filled by what we call the 16 kingdoms. So for 130 years, between 307 and 439, there were just a bunch of, we went from this to this. I'll repeat, the Xianbei up here and also the Xiongnu, many of whom were also actually assimilated into the Jin dynasty along the Yellow River in their army bases. They all combined to just say, forget serving the Jin or being north of them, let's just take over. And they did. And so the Xianbei and Xiongnu move into the Central Plain, the Wei River, the Yellow River, and they take it all, causing a massive, massive Han Chinese running south as refugees. And it's the age of what is called the 16 kingdoms at first, the barbarians running the north. Running is probably not a really good word for it because, as our timeline shows, again, from the collapse of the Jin in 307 to 439, when the Northern Wei, that Xianbei dynasty unified the north, that semi-barbarian Xianbei dynasty unified the north, the nomads. That 130 years after the collapse and before the Northern Wei, that was just a bunch of different nomad states, kingdoms, called the 16 kingdoms. So there we are, from 307 to 349. We have chaos in the north, and we have what was the Western Jin, or all of the Jin, fleeing south. So now we want to pick up with, this is just for you, B1, we want to pick up with the question of, what was the significance of this period? And we talked about, of course, before the Jin dynasty fell, while it did, the Western Jin, that's the whole Jin, because later they ran south and made a capital down here in Nanjing, and they call it the Eastern Jin. While the Western Jin was in control of unified China, we talked about the fact that the Sima family was corrupt, and so the Second Lotus Blossom, a new type of elite who said, we will not serve, the Seven Sages, and Tao Yuan Ming being our best example of that, developed a new type of gentleman who just retreated, refused to serve, and spent their time in a very Taoist, simplistic, rural wine, friendship, and poetry and song. But let's talk now about after the Jin collapse, this group, the Xianbei. Quite simply, I'm going to make this as short as possible. An amazing thing happens. Something called sinification. Sinification. You'll also see to sinicize or sinicize or sinify. In any case, Sino, S-I-N-O, or Sino just means becoming Chinese. And so in a nutshell, this is what is interesting about it. These Xianbei are our first of several, quote, barbarian, non-Chinese northern tribes who will conquer China. They do it here at the end of Wave 2. They're going to do it with the Mongols in the end of Wave 3. And a couple others are going to do it during the Song Dynasty before that. So what do they do when they control, when they actually take over the government of China? The Xianbei are our first example, and just in a nutshell, what they do is fascinating. They sinicize, meaning after that period of After that period of 16 kingdoms, over 130 years, when there's no control, these Xianbei create in 439 the Northern Wei. It unifies all of the Yellow River and Wei River. So all of North China is under one Xianbei king of the Northern Wei dynasty from 439 to 526. All right, so that's almost 100 years of a unified nomad barbarian kingdom in the Central Plain. In the north. Notice the Han Chinese ran south again. So we're focusing on the north, the Yellow River. We'll go down to the Yangtze River and what the Han Chinese did as refugees for all this time, really from 307 to 589, 307, 407. Over 250 years, the Chinese had lost their homeland in the north on the Yellow River. And so after 130 years of this 16 Kingdom chaos, the Northern Wei of the Xianbei takes over in 439. Roughly 30 years later, an emperor comes into power, a king comes into power there who does a very interesting thing. He is the one who says, we are going to stop being Xianbei nomads and we are going to become Chinese, voluntarily assimilating themselves into Chinese culture. List these basic examples of it because we want to see, will the Mongols do the same thing? Will the Westerners do the same thing? All sort of thing. How did they Sinify? First of all, they changed their names from their tribal names of their own language to Chinese surnames. So they took on the Chinese naming system, family system, naming system. They started to speak Chinese and read Chinese, including reading the Confucian classics. They started to dress Chinese. They started to practice Chinese culture and ritual. They started intermarrying with Chinese, mixing their blood with Chinese blood, taking Chinese wives or husbands and having mixed-race children. They were trying to become Chinese. The wildest thing that they did, and the most sort of interesting what-if that they did, particularly this king, in 471, he says, we're going to build a capital city in Luoyang that is as grand as the Han eastern capital, yada yada. And so he builds the capital city according to the Chinese capital plan. He starts running it with scholar officials, taking on the Chinese governmental system, and most interesting of all, he invites the families from the Yellow River that had run south at this point, almost 200 years earlier, he invites them to come back up and rejoin this Sinified Northern Wei Xianbei capital city and live there. And about 30,000 Han Chinese families from the south do come back. We have written accounts, and by all accounts, it is a fabulous, glorious, luxurious, no, not luxurious, but elegant and highly, highly sophisticated civilized culture. And so the big what if is, what if it hadn't been burned to the ground in 526 after only 50 years by the other Xianbei who weren't here at the capital in Luoyang? The Xianbei who weren't here, but the Xianbei who were in army bases all around, right? So they're country cousins who heard from their army bases and their cities all along the non-capital places that their king had suddenly said, let's stop being Xianbei and let's become Chinese. So these country cousins formed together, banded together, invaded, attacked, and destroyed the new capital city of the Xianbei in 526, and the Xianbei collapse, the Northern Wei collapses. That's 526. So here we are now, we're in the 6th century, and from 526 until 589, the north will be divided again. Still, Xianbei, Xiongnu, other nomads, and it basically divides into a northern Qi and a northern Zhou, both again nomad dynasties that split the Yellow River and Wei River areas. And they're fighting it out from 526 to 589. All right. In 589, Sui will unify, and China will be put back together again. So again, our focus just on that is we have seen the first example of northern conquerors actually deciding to stop being foreign and become Chinese. Sinification. That's our main focus there. That's it for that one.